Um, something that I've always been interested in is something I've always been interested in is developing a way to objectively look at spiritual traditions that doesn't end up descending into this subjective, my way is better, my God is better. And so, like you might talk to our normal experience with fanaticism, although it's not, unobjective spirituality, although it's definitely not the property of Christians alone. They don't have a monopoly on it. Hey, Rucker, hit those lights for me, would you? Thank you. Definitely, Christians don't have a monopoly on stupid spirituality, fanatical spirituality, exclusivistic, it's better because I'm doing it spirituality. Just like America doesn't have a monopoly on, thinking that somehow or other whatever we do is manifest destiny and is good and healthy, and whatever other countries do is bad. I don't know how familiar you guys are with the aftermath of World War II, but in the aftermath of World War II, we adopted a policy of encirclement around Russia. So, we put nuclear bases in Iran and in Turkey and in, Germany, and we tried to surround we made 2,000 military bases, like the whole world together didn't have as many military bases outside the country as the U.S. did. But we had these, we had military bases everywhere, and we had 10 times the amount of nuclear weapons they had. And we essentially tried to encircle the entire USSR with nuclear bombs so that we were never more than just like a moment away from being able to nuke them within a couple of minutes. So what they do, they brought a bunch of nuclear bombs into Cuba. 90 miles off the Florida coast. Which is it's totally exactly what we did, but on a much smaller scale. We encircled their whole country. You follow? We put nuclear bombs in West Germany, just like right there, just like boom. In Turkey, just literally right over the border. Pakistan, Iran, all over the Middle East, Israel. We just had so many nuclear armaments, all pointing towards Russia. And of course, we're doing the same thing with China. Tons of those islands have military bases with nuclear bombs on them, and they're also pointed in one direction. So we're really close. This is before the days of the ICBM, the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile. That's where you could fire, we had 25,000 nuclear bombs, we only had 100 ICBMs. Russia had we had 25,000 bombs, only 100 ICBMs in the 60s. Russia had, a tenth of what we had. They had 4 or 5 ICBMs, and they had, maybe 2,500 nuclear bombs. We were lapping them times 10. And then when they came and they brought nuclear bombs, they brought 100 nuclear warheads to Cuba, which we didn't know. We were going to invade Cuba. It was a whole thing. Cuban Missile Crisis, 1963. A huge thing in U.S. history. Anyway, the argument they made was, well, wait a second, you want us to take those missiles out of Cuba that we snuck in there, then you take your missiles out of Turkey. You follow? They tried to parlay it. Well, we snuck these in, but you've had missiles in Turkey for 10 years, upsetting us, right over the border from us. So you take your missile out of Turkey, we'll take your missile out of Cuba. You understand? You know, Russia overthrew the government of Hungary. Hungary decided to go democratic. Russia started to control, they had something called the Warsaw Pact. It was all the countries surrounding them, so that you couldn't get to them without going through these other countries. It was the Warsaw Pact. And then we made NATO, North American Treaty Trade Organization. And that's Western Europe. So Western Europe and the U.S. got hooked up with NATO, and then Russia hooked up with all of its immediate neighbors through the Warsaw Pact. Hungary was a supercritical country in that Warsaw Pact. They broke free, so we overthrew Hungary. Russia overthrew Hungary. Killed a couple thousand people and quelled the rebellion. But I mean, we were doing that stuff in Laos and in Vietnam, and we were doing that stuff in Chile and Latin America. We were toppling governments left and right and installing puppet regimes and doing whatever the heck we wanted to do, and supporting. We did the same thing in Iran. We put the Shah back in Iran. So whenever we found a regime we didn't like that was messing with our economic interests, we would then topple that regime. But then when they did the same thing, when it was messing with their security, then we pointed the finger of blame, how evil these communists are, not allowing for free elections. But we were fixing elections left and right. There's this, I don't know how it is, but people have this ability to just be incredibly hypocritical. And they do it with religion. Why is Jesus the only way? Because it says so in our book. Well, our book says Christian's the only way. Well, your book is wrong. Well, how do you know my book's wrong? Because Jesus didn't write it. Well, Jesus didn't write the Bible either. You're a demon. You're a devil. You get like that. You watch people. Sometimes smart people, sophisticated people. But then when they talk about religion, everyone puts on the dunce hat. We can't do that because we don't have a monopoly on religion here. So we have to actually convince people about our tradition. We can't just, any drunk guy in the street has a moment of spiritual awakening. It's a come to Jesus moment because he's in the U.S. and the U.S. is largely a Christian nation. So you automatically have hundreds of millions of followers just because you're the prevailing religion. We have the same thing going on in India. There's hundreds of millions of Hindus in India. So every time somebody has a come to Jesus moment in India, it's a come to Krishna moment, and they're coming to our temples and made a free member, and they might be just as stupid as the come to Jesus Christian, but it's the Hindu variety. But you didn't have to work for it. It's just automatic. My parents were this religion, so when I had awakening, I had that vision as well. I met a guy yesterday, he was telling me about a mushroom trip he had, and he saw Krishna in his mushroom trip. Well, yeah, because you're a devotee, you come around the temple, and then you went and took psychedelics, and so obviously you're going to see Krishna, because if you were a Christian, you'd see Jesus, and it would have been a different thing. It's what you're bringing to the table, not what the drugs are bringing. So, if you're not the monopoly religion, the prevailing religion in the culture, then you got to actually convince people. You got to convince people. You got to persuade people. You got to learn some rhetoric. It takes work. You put some skin in the game. You can't just assume people are going to come to you. Assume people are going to, have fealty for you and your tradition automatically as kind of a birthright thing. Like all Jews, all diaspora Jews are allowed a free trip to Israel. It's called birthright. If you're a Jew, you want to go back to Israel, you can claim your birthright. Right? Did you go? Yeah. Free trip, right? Kind of a thing. It's a rite of passage. It's a birthright. They call it birthright. You're born of a Jewish mother, you get to...
you get a free wedding if you marry someone.
Yeah, you get a free wedding. I think they pay for your hotel, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. the whole thing. Also, if you want to become a citizen of Israel and you're a Jew, guess what? You're in. You fly to Israel, and the day you get off the plane, you get your citizenship starts. And you get full rights of an Israeli citizen from anywhere in the world. The Israelis, of course, hate this because all the super poor Russian Jews go to Israel and they just automatically have rights. If you look at Israel today, it's super segregated. The Russian Jews are a whole different group of people, and the Israeli Jews, or everybody else, does not consider them to really be their kin and kith. Did you know this? So anyway, birthright. Just run out there. So, people do it on a national level. Like when our nation commits crimes against humanity, it's just, it's in the name of democracy and it's, so like that. But when another country does, it's despotic and dictatorial and this and that. But we're doing all sorts of horrible stuff to our people and people in other countries that we just somehow or other turn a blind eye to and don't think about too much. People do the same thing in the name of religion, and what that looks like is, well, my tradition's right and your tradition's wrong, and what it boils down to is because it's my tradition, and we're automatically right. You have to accept Jesus or you're going to go to hell. You have to accept Christian or you're going to go to hell. That's not true. How do you know it's not true? Because it doesn't say so in the Bible. Well, it says so in the Gita. Well, that book's wrong. I think the Bible's wrong. That's sacrilegious. You know what I mean? I say what you said is sacrilegious. No, it's not. It's the truth. Well, what I say is the truth too. No, you're not. You're bad. Have you ever had conversations like this with people? Smart people. And then as soon as you talk about religion, they get crazy dumb. Dumb enough that a 5-year-old would defeat them. People do that also with their nation and their nation's crimes against humanity as well. I mean, we're calling Russia evil. We were lynching people at that time. Post World War II, Cold War, we were still lynching people in the Deep South. Black people weren't allowed to vote. For all intents and purposes, they weren't allowed to vote. Legally, they were allowed to vote, but for all intents and purposes, they weren't allowed to vote. They were blocked. Horrible crime, horrible crimes against humanity. The opposite of democracy. The opposite, a government of the people for the people. So, I've always been interested in a spiritual discourse, a spiritual dialogue that was not dependent on saying, well, it's right because it's what I'm into. That didn't ultimately devolve to that. Where you could talk about spirituality and compare and contrast different religious traditions and decide which one was better without just referencing, well, this is my tradition. Does that make sense? I'm really interested in that. And I'm always looking at my own arguments, my own line of thinking, and making sure I turn it back on my own tradition to see if my arguments are hypocritical and if they cut both ways. If you meet somebody and they say to you, you have a psychological need to believe in God because you can't face the reality that you're alone in this world. How would you respond to that argument? You have a deep psychological need to believe in God because you can't face the reality that you're truly alone in this world. How do you respond to that? Loudly.
I would say I have a spiritual need to know God.
That's what you say. Fair enough. Okay. I have a spiritual need to know God. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. You think it's spiritual. It's actually psychological. You just can't wrap your head around that. You lost a little footing there. It's okay. Who's got a better answer? What's your answer? Yell at me.
I would say that in my life I've believed in different conceptions of God, including the absence of the existence of God. So the consistency wasn't there to support that claim.
Okay. Okay, sure. Well, now you are because you're getting older and you're getting kind of gray, and so you're freaked out. I feel like I still got some like legs under me. What would you say? Loud. I wasn't saying you. I was talking to Mason, but that's okay. It's all right.
I had a desire to believe in God even when I haven't felt alone. So it's been there when I felt alone and when I haven't felt alone.
That's because you have you always know that those people are eventually going to die, and you can't confront that reality of your own mortality, and so you run from that with your belief in a God.
I would then ask, well, then what do you believe in when you feel like really alone in this world?
I believe in truth. Cha-ching. I believe in truth. I believe in reality. I'm not looking for some flying spaghetti monster in the sky to make me feel better about myself because I can't deal with my own existential reality. Be careful when you ask somebody, what do you believe? Because you just gave them a soapbox to jump on. Be careful. In case you're not aware, we're in a debate. A debate is a fight with words. And when you give the mic to somebody, you're allowing them to initiate an attack. And you better know what they're going to say or be ready to contend with it. Anyway, here's my response to that. You have a psychological need to not believe in God. And you have a need to believe that you're alone in the universe because you can't stand the reality that there's actually somebody else watching. How is that argument less legitimate than mine? You have a need to believe in God. You have a need not to believe in God. You can't stand being alone. You can't stand not being alone. How does not cut equally both ways? Why get into some other thing about your testimonial of your life or trying to logically accept my premise and try to debate it? How about just not pulling the rug out from under me by pointing out that my argument just as easily gets used against me? It has no teeth to it whatsoever. I'm just making a statement and an accusation without any real evidence to support it. Do you follow that? I also have a need to breathe. Does that mean oxygen doesn't exist? I also have a need to drink water. Does that mean water doesn't exist? I have a need to eat food. Does that mean food doesn't exist? How is it that if I have a need for something that lends support to the argument that thing doesn't exist? It would seem, even as evolving beings, if you have a need for something, it probably exists because it benefits you and you have a need for it. How about that? You can flip that one too. Anyway, assuming that God exists, which is what we're going to do just because I want to read a verse today. Assuming that God exists. I don't want to argue for the existence of God today. So we're going to assume God exists, although it's a little bit non sequitur because I was just positive atheism. But when I want to talk about a legitimate spiritual discourse. So to make it easy for you guys to understand what poor lines of reasoning look like, I gave you the example of various forms of evangelical, nonsensical Christianity, and I gave you kind of a poor atheist argument as well. But I want to get back into theistic traditions. If you want to have a legitimate discussion, you have to find some common ground. You have to look for some common ground that you're obliged to follow, and I'm also obliged to follow. And then we can subject our traditions to that scrutiny, and we see which one comes out better. Maybe you're better at some things than I am. Maybe I'm better at some things than you are. Maybe we come together. Maybe we each learn something. Maybe we have to evolve our own spirituality. Maybe our texts have some mistakes in them. There's a bunch of real dangerous stuff that comes out of this. But it's the only way you can have a legitimate, unbiased discourse about spirituality is to decide on some objective criteria. So I'm gonna run with this a little bit. Here's a verse. Penance, tapasya, performed out of foolishness, with self-torture, or to destroy or injure others, is said to be in the mode of ignorance. Penance, austerity, the observance of religious rituals of self-regulation, like Lent for the Christians, or Ramadan for the Muslims, when you forego some things. Ash Wednesday, or various religious rituals that you participate in that involve some self-abnegation and giving up of certain things to propitiate and please God. Penance performed out of foolishness, with self-torture, or to destroy or injure others, is in the mode of darkness. So what does that do to cursing people? And black magic designed to curse people, or hex people, or voodoo against people. What does that do? That's critiquing that type of religion. You follow? How about the self-mutilating, when people poke holes in themselves or cut off a part of their foreskin or whatever people are doing? What does that say about it? It critiques it, right? And then out of foolishness, you're just doing it because somebody told you to do it without actually thinking about it. So it's 3 critiques. If your penance is just blind and there's no reason for it, if it involves self-torture, or if it is for hurting other people, those 3 things, then your penance is bad. It's bad religion. It's a bad, kind of a semi-punk band growing up I used to listen to called Bad Religion. So it's bad religion. Now somebody could say back to you, no, why? Why is self-torture wrong? Why is wanting to harm other people wrong? And why is doing things blindly wrong? They could legitimately ask this question. You have to be able to answer that question. And so you got to go through each one. And you have to defend what you said by finding some common ground that the other party has to accept, that then leads them to realize the truth of these statements. You follow? Hey, we were still lynching people in the U.S. while we were complaining about Russia. Well, so what's wrong about lynching people? Well, it's wrong to treat black people as inferior. Why is it wrong to treat black people as inferior? What's wrong to pay women less money? Why is it wrong to pay women less money? You follow? Well, it's wrong to install puppet regimes which are going to torture and maim people and mistreat their citizens just to help you with your military-industrial complex. That's a term that was coined by Eisenhower. Why is that wrong? Why are we not allowed to do that? Why weren't we allowed to kill the Native Americans? Well, because it's not good to hurt other people. Why is it not good to hurt other people? You follow? Do you understand? This is why it's hard to talk to a 5-year-old, because a 5-year-old will keep asking you, they'll do the Socratic thing innocently. They'll keep asking, well, why that? Why that? Why that? And pretty soon you're because I said so, and that's all. And then you just became a fanatic because you're not able to actually give them something they can grab a hold of. So why is it? Seems kind of obvious to all of us. I just write this and say, oh yeah, that's an objective critique. It critiques all sorts of indigenous religions. We're better than them. But why? Why does that critique stand? Why does our litmus test of what good religion looks like, why is it not simply our version of it? Why is it any less arbitrary? You follow my argument? My line of my problematizing of this issue? Who's got the answer? Who's ready to slay dragons right now?
Well, self-abnegation for blind self-abnegation, it seems just pretty self-explanatory. If you don't have
it's not self-explanatory to me. So saying it seems pretty self-explanatory, it's not self-explanatory to me. Everybody's following somebody, so I'm following my tradition. I don't have time to figure everything out and reinvent the wheel, so I listen to smart people, and I'm cool.
Well, if it's if you find the justification in your tradition, then then I wouldn't have anything against it. The verse wouldn't have anything against it. But
if you find justification for it within your tradition, then there's nothing wrong. Okay, so my tradition says it's okay to torture yourself. We've been cutting the tips off of kids' penises for a long time. Which sounds crazy, right? Genital mutilation. Welcome to Judaism.
But just because the tradition says it, I don't think it's logical justification.
Okay, so what kind of justification do I need?
Some rational justification.
So what's your rational justification that doing things blindly is wrong? Sometimes you do things blindly, it comes out fine. If you're following good people, it comes out fine.
You have to define what good is and what...
Fine, then do that. Why are you doing that now as I'm pressuring you? You made a lame argument. I pointed out your lameness of your argument, and now you want to get all like, define good. Fine, define good. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying you just define what was good and what was bad, and I'm saying you're fallacious in doing so. And you said it was self-evident. I disagree. And now you're going, well, you have to define what good is. Yeah, that's why I just asked you, Jack. How did you get a PhD? It's crazy, isn't it? Like, it should be a requirement to get like an undergraduate degree from college. You have to take some logic classes, some debate classes, some philosophy classes. We forget that a PhD is a doctor of philosophy. People just study their like small thing and they don't like learn how to think. Sorry for ripping on you. But you raised my ire when you got all like with your pink shirt on, got a little fancy on me. Are you ready to like do something? You're wearing pink too, so you're like in my crosshairs as well.
2 minutes, so.
All right.
I would say that it's not okay to torture yourself, because if you believe in God and you think that everything comes from God, then your body also is sacred because it's connected to God. Therefore, doing something that's, torturous.
All right, the body belongs to God, therefore to do something which tortures your body is therefore against God. I disagree. I think that's like the most beautiful thing you could do is to give your body to God. Just like you give your body to a good cause. You like fall on the grenade and like save a bunch of people or whatever. So I'm giving my body to God. I'm raised in a religion where like God martyred himself for people and like performed the greatest sacrifice. Jesus died on the cross. That was God dying on the cross, setting an example for us. I find that to be beautiful. So you're just telling me like you shouldn't do that because my body belongs to God. Now I'm giving it back to him. That's the most beautiful thing ever.
Well, if that's your conception of divinity, that's really sad. The highest.
Oh, you're sad? Oh, it's so sad. You're going to go that route? Oh, that's just so sad. Okay. So I won, you lost, you're a sore loser, and now you're like you pity me? Like from your big high place? Which is like illogical. You can't argue. You've been defeated, and then you're like a 3-year-old intellectually, but you're going to pity me? Not going to gain points for that. The pity card on the way out the door is just going to get you kicked in the tush on your way out the door. Okay. And now you guys awakened like a dragon. So now I'm up and running. Everybody wants to raise their hands? All right. Oh, because I insulted your wife? Okay, let's hear it.
Krishna didn't say it was bad or good. He just said that you're going to get this result.
He didn't say any result. He says it's in the mode of ignorance. Yeah.
So that's the result of doing these things.
Okay.
You can go ahead and do the experiment yourself, and you're going to find that you're hanging out with low-class people.
You know, the problem with that is this. Listen. First of all, no, I could live in a cave and slice off pieces of my flesh and offer them to the deity without hanging out with low-class people. Krishna says some of ignorance or darkness, indicating like it's a bad thing. You should move towards the light and away from the darkness. He describes self-realization as being illuminating and darkness as being negative. So he's saying this is bad religion. He's saying it's not good religion. It's not what he's endorsing. It's not what he's presenting that you should be doing. And you're saying, well, if you do it, you'll get a bad result and you'll end up suffering. No, actually, I feel closer to God than ever. When I pierce my body or cut off my foreskin or genital mutilation or whatever people are doing in the name of religion these days, I actually feel like closer to God. I feel a little free from my body. Kellogg, the guy who made Kellogg brand cereal, was really into circumcision And so Kellogg sponsored research that said that circumcision was cleaner. It's not. It was necessary. It's not. I mean, it's so insane. Like protection from disease, it doesn't. Has no bad effects, it does. But one of Kellogg's arguments was the kids will associate trauma and pain with their genitals. And therefore, as they get older, they'll be more likely to be chaste. That's actually like in writing from Kellogg, who put tons of money from your breakfast cereal into supporting like everybody on the planet getting circumcised, which is the very definition of malpractice, genital mutilation, with no actual benefit to a child who's not even at the age of like consent, with no anesthesia. It's horrible. So I can just say, oh, I did the experiment and actually feel closer to God as a result. You left in my hands to do the experiment. Who else? Really? I mean, I'm running out of time till I can explain it myself. All right, let's hear it.
Do you believe in an all-good, all-powerful God?
Oh, absolutely. I believe in an all-good and all-powerful God.
Great. And what was your reason for the self-mutilation?
Because God told me to.
Okay. So my only question about how you have an all-good, all-powerful God. Wait, hold on. Do you know why God told you to do that?
No, I don't question God.
Okay.
It's in my sacred scriptures.
Okay.
I could philosophize about it. Maybe he wants me to feel some pain so I won't turn away from him and so I can be chaster. I could go the Kellogg route, but maybe I don't know. Maybe I do know. Maybe that's one argument. Maybe not. Take your pick. Whatever.
It doesn't make sense that an all-good, all-powerful God
Why not?
would need you. Because
He doesn't need me to. It's for my benefit. God wants me to hurt myself for my benefit.
okay, that might be one way to benefit, but why would the way to be closer to God need to be a painful and...
Because growth is painful.
But you don't need that painful growth to be closer to God.
You asked why would it be painful? Because growth is painful sometimes.
Okay, why would God choose that specific painful way for you to become closer to him if there's another way for you to be closer to him that does not require like hurting your body?
But there is no other way.
How do you know?
That's a good line of reasoning. All right. I don't want to argue with you anymore. I'm running out of time. That's what you got to do. You got to take it all the way back. Is God all good and all powerful? Yeah, God's all good and all powerful. Okay. Would an all good God want you to be able to turn to him, causing you the least amount of suffering possible? Yes, he would. If your parents loved you, would they want you to learn your lessons with the least amount of suffering possible? Yes. Good. Could an all powerful God create a universe where you could learn with the least amount of suffering possible? Yes, he could. So an all-good God, an all-powerful God, would create a universe where, to turn towards him, you require the least amount of suffering possible, right? Could you conceive of a parent who raised their child, and their child didn't have to cut off part of their penis in order to love him? Sure we could. We could conceive of a parent who would raise their children, and so they didn't have to do that, right? So could God create a universe where we didn't have to cut off part of our anatomy in order to prove our love for him? Right? You follow? So now your demand of a sacrifice of flesh, of your own flesh, self-torture, it now is at odds with an all-good and all-powerful God. An all-good God would want to make it as easy as possible and not give you any unnecessary suffering. And an all-powerful God could create such a universe. And we can very easily think of a universe where souls were able to turn back towards God without cutting off part of their anatomy. Therefore, religion which teaches self-torture is not in congruence with an all-good and all-powerful God. Do you follow this? It's not easy. You have to actually make that argument. You got very close. You didn't quite make the point that an all-good God would want to do this, an all-good God could do this. Could you conceive of a parent who could raise their child to be loving without forcing them to cut off part of their body? You have to run through these kinds of arguments with somebody till it clicks for them. You follow? And you did quite well. You were almost there. You might have gotten there. For all I know, you would have won the argument. You were definitely on the right track. You following this? You following this? That's with harming yourself. Same argument essentially holds true for harming others. You follow? Would an all good God love all of his children equally? Would he want you to also love them like he did? Would becoming like God mean that you would also therefore love all of God's children? Would that mean you want to create the least amount of suffering for other people as well? And you build the argument for other people as well. Would an all good God be logical and reasonable and fair and just? Right? And therefore to follow such a God, would you be required to give up your intelligence? And you make a similar argument. In this way, looking at the bedrocks of spirituality, the belief in divinity, the belief in a particular conception of divinity, and discussing with somebody, do you have a dystheistic conception of divinity where you think God's evil or mean, or do you believe in an all-good God? And then you can start to argue with people, what are the ramifications of that basic belief system? And you build a theology out of these foundational principles. And it's hard work. And you got to know what the building blocks are. You got the other party to agree to the building blocks, and then you got to work from them and abstract and extrapolate from them and come to conclusions. And those conclusions may favor our tradition, they may favor another tradition, but they are objective, and people agree to that set of rules from the beginning. And then working from that set of rules, you can construct an argument. And if somebody does not believe in an all-good God or an all-powerful God, then you have to have that debate. You have to talk about, your conception of divinity. If they don't believe in a God at all, you have to have that debate. You have to convince them there's a God and use things like consciousness that they can't deny. Then once you get to there's consciousness, you have to figure out how God's all good and all powerful. And you have to make an argument for that. And once you get to that, you can start to think about what good religion might look like. And maybe you can't account for things like dress codes and the name of God that you chant and, particular details like that. But you can start to deal with stuff like eating flesh. You can start to deal with stuff like crying out the name of God. You can start to deal with stuff like a personal conception of God, an intimate conception even of God. You can start to lay out the basics of our tradition in an objective way that's convincing, that's persuasive, that gets you out of this hypocritical, it's better because I said so, loop of circular reasoning that everybody in spirituality gets into. And you can have those same discussions with your own personal ethic, with your spirituality, with your nation's ethical stance, with their activities, with your tradition stance on issues, and you can start to have a genuine spirituality which really stands up to some scrutiny because you've taken the time to reason through your tradition, understand why you believe what you believe, and you can explain to somebody else, even if they keep asking you why this, why that, why that. You just keep going with them as far back down the basics as they need to go, and then you can build a shared platform. And that's towards an objective dialogue. And I appreciate the Bhagavad Gita because statements like this provide me with some really good stuff. I can argue from this. These verses are powerful. And there's all these sacred cows and plausibility structures, crazy things that people do. Circumcision is insane. Why should it be legal to mutilate a child's genitalia just because people have been doing it for a long time? That's insane. At various points in U.S. history, like 90% of the population was circumcised. The male population was circumcised. It's a lot less nowadays. I think it's down to like 2/3 or even 60%. It's gone down in recent years because people are waking up and smelling the chai latte and figuring it out. But it's like, what's wrong with people? But we never think about that. We never thinks twice. Like an option, you have your kid in the hospital. It's like a little boxer check, like do you want you know what I mean? It's like, do you want, you're ordering a sundae. They're like, do you want nuts with that? Do you want sprinkles with that? And you're like, yeah, check that box. They check the box. And they get out the scalpel and mutilate your child. And so when you start to look at spirituality objectively, some of the sacred cows fall by the wayside. Some things get questioned. Some things maybe don't work. Maybe you have to give up some of your self-righteous envy of people and your condemnation of people who aren't like you. You know? That the knife cuts both ways. But if you can learn how to think like this, then you can talk to any reasonable person, and there's a high probability you'll be able to find some common ground, and you'll be able to get somewhere in your discussion with them. And no matter how fancy you get, if you don't do this, you're eventually going to segue into the, well, because I said so. Okay. Is there a thought? Someone have a comment? So, one of the things I like about the Gita is I find that many of its arguments for the nature of its religion, the nature of its conception of divinity, are quite defendable. They're quite objectively reasonable. They're not just reasonable for people in the bubble. You can be outside of the bubble and you can look in and it makes sense. It's coherent. And it provides you with a beautiful conception of divinity that really stands up to scrutiny, provided you can understand why these arguments are being made and you can learn to build an argument. You can get out of your ivory tower, the other party can, you get some common ground, and you can discuss these points, and good things come out of it. And when you do this kind of stuff, eventually you find out that you have a bunch of outmoded ways of thinking, not just about spirituality, but about life in general. Weird ideas about the kind of person you want to get married to, weird ideas about what truth looks like, weird ideas about the kind of people you want to be friends with, weird ideas about what success consists of, weird ideas about what you're on this planet for, weird ideas about what's really worth pursuing. A lot of weird, poorly thought out, reactive, inherited ideas that need to have light shown on them. And you're due for an update across the board. And then you go back and you look at a nation's policies and your family's policies and the legacies they passed on to you. And the ideology you got from college and what the media says, as well as what your priests say and everything in between. And you look at it through a fresh lens and you become a truth seeker. And you start to notice that fallacies abound, and that circular reasoning and circular logic abounds, and that there's lots of people in the world who just don't think clearly. Eon used to get emails from a group of logicians from the Indiana University, which originally was its own seminary court. It was really set up by the Presbyterians, Indiana University. Most of the great universities in the U.S. were originally set up as seminaries for training priests, and they eventually got secularized. Anyway, Indiana University. There was a teacher of logic there, and he had an email he would send out, and he would just, in his free time, he's a teacher of logic, in his free time he would just scour newspapers and just find logical fallacies and then, present them to you, and then you would get a chance to look through it and find the fallacy. And then he would write, a little formal critique of the article and the poor reasoning. It's every day of your life you're encountering lousy reasoning. You're engaging in discussions. And especially about something as important to you as religion, we should take the trouble to think through our conception, to think through our philosophy, to think through our theology, to be able to present it to anybody who's willing to listen and put some skin in the game. And so one of the things I like about a verse like this from the Gita is it really, for me, it sets the stage. It sets the stage for a very dispassionate, very objective, truth-seeking conversation where you can compare and contrast different religions and not get caught up on dress codes and language and the age of the tradition and the age of the people and the fanaticism and the zealousness of their belief system and what continent they were from, and everybody's saying like we're allowed to believe whatever we want. Actually, it's not true. It's not true. Just because your forefathers said this, and just because you're from a certain part of the world, doesn't mean that your ideas are automatically valid. There are lots of stupid people that lived a long time ago all over the world. And, at some point you gotta not just give everybody a free pass and some kind of kumbaya thing, but you gotta call it out. And then when that lens gets pointed back at you, you gotta take your hits there too. And everybody benefits. That's what I got for you today. Any final thoughts? Yeah, loud.
I appreciate you talking about just your comments. When I heard the verse, I was just thinking, how could pain be a path to anything good? But then hearing you speak, I realized how important it is to problematize verses all the time, and then you'll seriously start to think rationally and figure it out.
Yeah, because what happens is here's the thing, here's how it goes. We all play a little bit of chess. So when we think of a theoretical argument we could have with somebody, we usually think 2 or 3 moves ahead, almost like checkers. We don't really play chess, we play checkers. We think a couple of moves ahead, like tic-tac-toe. We're playing tic-tac-toe. About the intellectual capacity of a tic-tac-toe player. I mean, tic-tac-toe isn't a fun game because after you're about 7 years old, no one ever wins. Because there's just only so many opening gambits, there's only so many moves. You can spot all of them and you can neutralize a game. By the time you're 7, you can play against a master tic-tac-toe player and they'll never win because there's only 6 or 8 possibilities. You can know all of them inside of a good day of playing. If you're 7 years old, you're reasonably intelligent, and you play tic-tac-toe for a full day, you've learned the entire game and no one's ever going to win. So I think most of us are like a tic-tac-toe player. We think through 1 or 2 of the possibilities. But unless you really problematize it and you think through how somebody could actually argue with you, unless you encounter that kind of resistance, then you don't think all the way through the chess match. And so it's important to subject yourself to some scrutiny, to problematize issues, to take the Socratic approach of asking why until the answer really satisfies, to figure out how far back you have to go before you can make sense out of the whole thing, and to become adept at it. And that exercise in critical thinking, whether it's about spirituality or anything else, it leads to a better life, a more examined life, a more thoughtful life, a more surgical life, a more progressive and successful life, where you get more done and you think things through clearly, you make better decisions, because this stuff infiltrates every aspect of your life. And yeah, I saw what you wrote, Laura. Yeah, people say this just is what it is. Right? And you get old people saying that. Old people who are supposed to be respectable and wise and venerable, and they're just well, that's what it is. It's a tremendous mystery, and you can't know, and don't be offensive, and don't doubt the Christ by asking such questions. It's that's kind of that's all you got? Are you kidding me? That's all you got? A good grade school, a good 11-year-old in a debate class is going to beat you. You're not even at a junior high school level Lincoln Holmes debate. You get they mop up the floor with you. Like I said, more valuable than any of the things people go learn calculus. Learn how to think, All right. I'm going to get off my soapbox. We'll do a little kirtan. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.